We're all living longer and there's less money to go around. So how can we provide the right care for older people in Norfolk? Hello. The number of people in Norfolk over the age of 65 is expected to rise by 28% over the next 14 years. At the same time, the County Council is having to make cuts to its social care budget. They're hoping to save around £32 million by 2019. The Council published a report on Monday explaining how they plan to tackle the challenge of an ageing population. Christina Brinkley was there.
A hot topic for Norfolk on a very hot day. Adult social care, things like caring for the elderly and disabled, has long been under pressure here. It's expensive and demands high. Today, a new report presented at Norfolk County Council identifying the challenges facing us and how to go forward to cope with rising costs and pressures.
We have a defined budget with an increasing demand, and therefore the committee is charged with how to get the best care for the frail and vulnerable in Norfolk with the money that we have available. And so we really need to understand the issues that Norfolk faces so that we can then make the best decisions going forward about how we utilise the resources that we have.
The council's got a £369 million budget for the service, and this year put in an extra £25.7 million. But pressure on the service will only increase. The number of over 65s in Norfolk will grow from around 210,000 to 275,000 over the next 14 years, more than a quarter of our population. The number of over 85s will soar by 77% in the same time, so things won't get easier.
We think that if we can keep them in their homes, even if it's for another 5 or 10 years, that's more of an active life that they'll have. That's not to say that we don't have some excellent residential care homes, but I do think that we need to prioritise our resources, and actually if we can spend money better, keeping people more active and more involved at home, then that's better for them, and it also means that the council can help more people.
Bill Borrett from Norfolk County Council ending that report. So, does the council's plan make sense and will it work in practice? Here to talk about this is Susan Ringwood, who's the Chief Executive of Age UK Norwich. Also with us this evening, Tim Allard, who's the Executive Manager of Norfolk Carers Support, and Christine Morgan, who manages the Claremont Nursing Home in Great Yarmouth. Good evening. Do you think, Susan Ringwood, this is a good strategy, keep people in their homes longer?
We know that most people do want to be able to stay in their own homes for as long as they possibly can, and their families and loved ones are very keen to support that. But it isn't necessarily the answer for everyone. Everyone has family who can support them, and some people do need more support than can be given at home. But
will it save money?
I don't think it will necessarily save money if it's done really well. To give people the kind of support they need to be able to stay at home isn't always going to be cheaper than providing them with residential care.
Tim Allard, what do you think? Is it a good plan?
I think there's no real great surprises, and I think generally a welcome approach. I guess the implementation of it will be where the real challenge lies.
The devil's always in the detail.
The devil's in the detail. So the greater emphasis on early help, I think, is and prevention. We've been talking about prevention for many years, putting that in place, getting advice and information to people as early as possible before issues become more difficult, challenges become more at the crisis end, I think, is the critical aspect.
What impact will it have on carers, do you think?
Well, I think increasingly carers, unpaid carers in Norfolk, family carers in Norfolk, will experience greater demands on them to pick up, where people would otherwise have been going into services or going to knocking on the social care front door. A greater onus will be placed on family carers in the future, and I would say this, wouldn't I? I think greater investment in support to family carers is going to be critical going forward. Okay,
Christine Morgan, what do you think of this plan? Is it a good idea?
Not fully. I think it will work for some, but not for everybody, because the package has got to be really personal centred, and at the moment that's not what's happening. Unless they really look at the full package of what everybody needs and puts the right amount of care in the right times and places, it won't work. And what we do as a residential or nursing home, we then have crisis people coming in at crisis, which is not good enough, because the family are at crisis, not just the residents, and then is impacting on the whole family.
Tell us about some of the people who you meet. What kind of problems are they coming to you with?
I've recently had a lady who found her mum couldn't live at home with her husband, so tried to look after her as an unpaid carer, found she couldn't cope and couldn't find any care packages that suited her needs. So obviously it wasn't personal centred. She could have somebody first thing in the morning to do tablets or get them up in the morning, but she needs somebody for the school run. She doesn't want somebody, it's a package that suits them. It's got to be around her mum. She couldn't get that, so that lady's gone to respite care, which might have been avoided if she'd have had the right care with the right people, looking at what's in their best interest.
And does that echo the sort of stories that you are both hearing as well?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
We know particularly out in the rural areas, although I only focus on Norwich, we're aware of what happens across the county as well, and it can be particularly difficult to get those very flexible packages out in the county. The service providers are excellent on the whole, but they're just not able to really be as flexible as people need to be. Getting out late in the evenings, for example, is a real problem.
Okay, well let's also hear from a Norfolk GP, a former Norfolk GP, Susan Vaughan. She's now part of NHS Norfolk Action Group. We asked her what she thought about the strategy for caring for more people at home and whether it will work well for patients.
It all depends how well it's done, doesn't it? I think that most people would genuinely do hope to stay in their own homes and carry on life as they've known it, but this mustn't be at the expense of leaving them at the beck and call of fleeting carers, really. I don't know how often people are still being expected to go to bed at 7 o'clock because that's the only time that they can provide somebody to help them to get to bed. And I don't know if that's still happening. You can see that there's a good idea in there, but whether or not it is good in practice all depends on the level of care and the quantity of care and the actual detail of who is doing the caring. So I hope that it's as good as they describe, but the proof of the pudding will be in the eating.
Susan Vaughan there. So she raises the problem of people having to go to bed at 7 o'clock. She says she doesn't know whether it's still happening. Is it still happening?
Yes, we do know that.
Yeah.
I think all of us are aware of that. I say particularly out in the more rural areas, certainly.
So that must be incredibly difficult for those people who are stuck at home alone at that time.
Yes, and also I know from the village I live in, one of our neighbours worked on the farm all his life. Actually, he would like to be up at 6 in the morning because that's been his habit of life, to be up very early. Yeah. And they don't come to him till 8:30, 9. And so he has to stay in his bed until someone can come and get him up. So it works at both ends of the day. It can be very difficult for people.
Yeah. Choices to people can't be made in packages. It's got to be person-centred. You can't get that in the care at the moment. They need to look at how they're going to do that. And they won't have the money to do that because it can't be that flexible.
Because presumably you can offer something more person-centred in your nursing home.
Yeah,
they can get up when they're ready, is that
right? That's right, because we have somebody there 24/7, so nobody, if they get up in the middle of the night and it's their choice, that's fine, because you have people on tap to do that. You take somebody back into their own home, you haven't got that, so people have to stay in bed. Some people can't get out of bed, so actually they get more isolated rather than more independent.
And what does it mean for these family carers? Because if they're not getting that support at the right times of day, I guess they can't run their lives.
I think if 60% of carers, family carers, don't actually live with those that they're caring for. So the way that we all live tends to be that children are living on the other side of the county and so on and so forth. So
maybe they've got a job and their own children to care for.
Indeed, and often so I think as part of this sort of technological approaches to providing support to people, the ways in which families can have confidence that someone can support mum and dad close at hand. I would also place a big emphasis, and I think the strategy alludes to that, around support to communities, and that there's a lot of good kindness and compassion in the communities across Norfolk, and I think going back to things like good neighbourhood schemes and people looking out for one another and those kinds of things are increasingly important.
Okay, well one problem we often hear about in social care is staff retention and the number of people expected to leave the sector. Geraldine Scott's the health correspondent at the Eastern Daily Press, and she spoke to Neil Perry on Norfolk Replies.
When people are in social care, if they're leaving their current job, they're staying within the social care sector. They're not leaving the sector. They enjoy the work. It's really rewarding for a lot of people. The problem is that when they are leaving, it's because they are reaching retirement age themselves, or a lot of people also come out to care for their own members of their own family, maybe as unpaid carers. And there's a whole army of unpaid carers that prop up the sector as well.
So, Christine Morgan, we know carers are not very well paid, but £8 an hour, I think. How difficult is it to get the staff?
It is very difficult, and we want people what care. We don't want just somebody who wants a job. So it is very difficult, and it's difficult to actually retain them because of all the training that they need to have to do the job now. Especially in areas where, you know, people have got to travel because people haven't got cars. So at the moment we're lucky, we've got good staff which have been there a long time, and I think that's what residentials can offer more than they can, where people in their own homes, because you get different staff, different days, whereas at least in care homes you're seeing the same faces, maybe not all day, but most of the week you're getting the same faces in and out, which is good if you can retain staff.
And is that a problem that you're hearing about in the community, that really there's just not enough carers to do the jobs?
Absolutely, I think it really can be an issue. We really need to be able to invest in the market for the word, the people providing these services. I know how tight it is for them to be able to put on the level of care that they want to with the money that's available to them. So there's much more that needs to be done to invest in making sure we've got a really good pool of workforce to draw on, and working more closely with the informal carers too as well. We just work in Norwich, and it's not that the people of Norwich are less friendly than the villages. I know that's not the case, but there's something about a smaller group of people. If there's only 700 of you in a village, you perhaps do know everybody. The same 700 people in a part of Norwich maybe don't know each other so well. So I think we do have to work a bit harder to build on the neighbourliness in the city compared to the villages.
And we'll talk more about solutions after the break, but just briefly about the money. I mean, it's not a lot of money, £8 an hour.
No,
do those wages need to go up? I mean, they will go up, won't they, with the minimum wage increases?
Slowly.
It can, but again, if they're going to put the wages up, they have to look at what they're paying people to actually pay for the care then, and that's what we don't get. It's not a full circle. You can keep putting the wages up, but unless you look at how much you're going to pay for the care, that's not going to work.
Okay, all right. Stay with us after the break. We'll be talking more about possible solutions for caring for older people in Norfolk. Welcome back. Tonight we're talking about social care and carers in Norfolk after the County Council published a report which outlined how it plans to deal with the problem of an ageing population at the same time as making budget cuts. On the panel tonight is Susan Ringwood from Age UK Norwich and Tim Allard, who's with Norfolk Carers Support. Also with us, Christine Morgan, who runs a nursing home for older people in Great Yarmouth. So, what needs to be done to address the problems we've been talking about? Some people think drastic change is needed. Let's hear from Jonathan Moore, the chairman of Equal Lives.
Ideally, what we need is a whole look again at the whole way social care is funded and subsidised, which ultimately is going to require possibly a change of government. But I think the whole way social care is looked at and structured needs to be rethought out, because at the moment it's still failing some very vulnerable people, and I think we still live in very worrying times.
Hello?
Jonathan Moore there. So, I mean, he wants a radical change, but we've had the Queen's speech this morning and there's nothing in there about changes to the way we pay for care. Is that worrying, disappointing, perhaps?
I think we know it's something we need to address, and we all know the times that we're living in. We have got to be, pragmatic and practical, but we would want to see the government of the day making a commitment to what they're going to do. 2 weeks ago, it was the top headline issue that they were going to be addressing, and now it's just disappeared off the list.
There is a consultation going on. What would you like to see in that consultation? What kind of things do they need to be looking at?
I'd like to see a bit more than a consultation, frankly. I mean, I think that people in communities have many good ideas. They need to be involved. I think providers from across different sectors need to be around the table. The local authority is an important, but albeit one partner amongst many.
So you're talking about charities and
talking about
businesses
and businesses indeed. Yeah, I mean there are sort of models and transactions and ways of working that we can learn from other sectors as well. My sense in Norfolk at the moment specifically is that we're all generally in agreement about what some of the challenges are. What doesn't seem to be happening is the conversation where people are coming together to find solutions, and the general election and the sort of the ambiguity around where we go in that context, and the Queen's the announcement today doesn't particularly help, I don't think, on the ground at a local level.
What should be in this consultation, Christine, as far as you're concerned?
It should be looking at how flexible care can be. If you want people to be independent and have choices, then you've got to have flexible care.
Doesn't that cost too much? When we are where we are.
But that's what they've got to do if they need to look at how they're going to pay for it and find other ways, and like Tim said, use other people to help support that, because there's lots of people out there with different pockets of money that maybe can offer support in a different way, but they need to work together. We could work with the community, which we're trying to do already. We've already got support groups in place trying to help people to come and get advice, but we can only do that if the government looks at it in the right way. They can't just throw less money at the same problem, because that's not going to it's just making the issues worse.
I think there's also something about having conversations with people earlier.
Yes.
So the idea of sort of planning ahead. I appreciate that sometimes situations change quickly, and people
if they become suddenly
ill and so on. But oftentimes to have those conversations around, dare I say, things like power of attorney, but sort of advanced planning, thinking ahead. What needs to be in place in case of emergency, those kinds of conversations, and trying to engender a culture across the county about where we're all having those conversations much earlier on.
And Christine talked about joined up working. What else could be done?
And I think that having that conversation earlier, absolutely with the people directly involved, but for the council and the authorities to have that conversation earlier with people like ourselves who've got a solution or can be part. We all stand ready to contribute to this. We're all in agreement that there are good aims underpinning it, and yet at best we get asked to comment once something's published and done, and not brought to the table when we could bring some of the innovative solutions we have every day. We're used to doing.
What sort of solutions are we talking about?
Well, I say using the informal carers, in the voluntary sector and others, we're used to doing a lot with very little, being very flexible, moving fast. We're not bound by some of the bureaucracies. We might have solutions that could help.
A practical one for us, which is well known in terms of our conversations with local authorities and so on, is around assessments and carers' assessments. Through the Care Act, carers are entitled to an assessment.
And social services do that, I think.
And social services do that. But actually, we find that a lot of people don't need those formal assessments. What actually is more helpful is to have language of a pre-assessment, if you like, and that often people who end up having a formal assessment through social services end up back in the services that we and others are providing in communities. So getting to people earlier, having those conversations earlier, and actually preventing people needing to go nearer to more acute and more expensive social care.
So people who are actually at the ground level should be part of the consultation, because they're the people working with it from a day-to-day basis, and that's from residential, from age concern, or from wherever you are. We could all impact and show them the barriers that they're facing, so they can learn from it as well as us, because people who are making decisions are not being there. They haven't been carers themselves and don't understand what they're doing to the people out in the community.
This bit about the assessments, I understand it, almost half of the people wait for an assessment, a social worker does the assessment, and half the time, so 50% of the time, the outcome of that assessment is this person needs more information. Now, you know, they've waited a long time.
Maybe we knew that at the beginning.
Maybe
yes.
we could have found that sooner, and I think that's what Tim's saying. You know,
when we do assessments, because we do pre-assessments before we accept a person coming into our home, we find as much information about that person so we can make it work.
Okay.
They don't do that. They put a package in what they think will work, and it hasn't got no research to it. It needs a lot more of that.
Okay,
if it's going to work.
Okay, the idea of caring for more people in their own homes sounds like a good one, and we've talked about some of the benefits and drawbacks, but is there a risk of some of them getting cut off, isolated or lonely? We put that question to Norfolk's Adult Social Care Committee Chairman, Councillor Bill Borrett.
The reason that we're having a campaign against loneliness is that we've discovered that actually loneliness really affects the mental and physical outcomes of people. They do deteriorate, and the council has seen that. We wouldn't want anybody to be lonely, which is why we've launched this campaign. And we are saying to people, if you have a neighbour that you don't see very often or doesn't get out very well, engage with them, because that's what Norfolk's been famous for. I'm very privileged to have been brought up here, and I've found that the Norfolk community is incredibly strong, and anything we can do to help reinforce that is something that should be encouraged.
Councillor Bill Borrett there. I mean, he talks about getting out and meeting your neighbours. In reality, do people do it though? Are we just running busy lives? It doesn't happen.
I think it does happen. I think it could happen more. I think people are willing to look out for each other, and we've seen that in the recent terrible events on the news very recently. How much people have just stepped up and helped complete strangers in times of need, and we can build on that goodwill and bring it into our cities and communities.
But is it right to rely on that, to rely on the goodwill of others?
You can only do that up to a point, because like you say, you've got very, very, very busy lives, and people may be going to check on somebody at 9 o'clock in the morning, may not be able to check at somebody at 9 o'clock at night. How do you know that's going to happen for that person? So people are going to be more isolated unless they can get more flexible care out there in the community. Whereas, just when people go into residential care, they're still going out, they're still going about, they still have friends and family or neighbours that they can see. So that's where you need to work together to make it work outside.
And Tim, Allard, it's not just about older people, is it? It's also about disabled adults, and that must be a big difficult problem for those families who've got to be in there and support those people.
Indeed. I think there are, as I said earlier, some sort of technological solutions out there in terms of people having abilities to contact others when they need to. I actually think there's, as I said again earlier, there's a lot of good sort of neighbourly activity in communities. It is sometimes about supporting those who know an area really well, and we had a great example just last week in North Walsham, where there is a campaign around thinking carer in the area. Local organisations coming together and sort of recognising that there are people within North Walsham who are just a little bit more alert about those who don't necessarily have support or are in isolation. Yeah. It's for me, it's very much a local solution that we need to be putting an emphasis on.
We're almost out of time. I'd just like to hear from all of you. What would be, if you could think of one thing that you'd like to see done or to do, what would it be, Susan? Just briefly.
I think it's really listening to what people need. We've heard a lot about how flexible and person-centred it needs to be. It's got to be individual solutions, but be creative and involve everybody who's ready to help.
What would your key thing, Tim, be?
I agree. Well, I think probably organisations coming together and finding ways of working. The sum of the parts is that much greater than any one single organisation doing something at a local level.
A quick word, 20 seconds or so. What would you like to do?
I'd like them to really look into everything that people need. And whether they can actually give it to them before they make a decision whether to stay at home or not, so that they're safe and the risk is minimised, like anybody doing in a care home.
Yeah, okay, all right. Thank you all very much. It's been really, really interesting to talk to you today, but that is all we've got time for this evening. If you want to add your comments to this debate, you can find us on Facebook @Mustard TV. We're also on Twitter @MustardThisWeek. Good night.